October is fast approaching and it's time for some creepy macabre. Hello, bookaholics. Welcome to my channel. This is Angela, your own bookaholic brown nymph. If this is your first time here, let me tell you what we do here. We talk about books, and books in this channel. So if you are a bookaholic like me, please do not hesitate from subscribing to my channel and also like and share so that more and more bookaholics like you and me can discover my contents. In today's video, I'm going to talk about 4 short stories that I just read yesterday, and that is from a genre which I do not generally read from, which is the horror genre. Now, generally, I do not prefer reading horror, and I don't know, it just doesn't sit right with me. However, in the beginning of this year, I happened to watch this TV show called The Haunting of Hill House, which I absolutely loved. And after watching the show, I did some online digging and I found out that the show is based on a book. And I immediately went and purchased the book on Kindle, but I haven't read it yet. And also this year, I read another book called The Mexican Gothic, which is also from the horror genre, and I absolutely loved it. That book is one of my favorite reads this year. So then it dawned upon me that maybe horror is not something that I absolutely abhor or that I need to stay away from. Maybe it's the kind of horror that I need to pick and choose. Also, the other day I was sitting down to write down my October TBR, and because October is this whole Halloween themed month, and a lot of people are putting in a lot of creepy and horror stories into their TBR, I decided maybe I should try this because I'm kind of being attracted to the horror genre. And also I've been following a lot of booktubers who just love horror stories and are raving about the horror stories that they are reading. For example, Leslie from The Nerdy Narrative, Mike from Mike's Book Reviews, and Sarah from Sarah Reads, etc. all love reading from the horror genre. So I thought that when these intelligent, well-read and prolific book readers are just loving this genre, maybe I should also give it another try. Considering these two factors, and coupled with the fact that I am a very foolishly courageous literary adventurer, I decided to dip my toe in the horror genre with short stories from the most prominent horror Gothic literature writer, Edgar Allen Poe. I think it is kind of daunting and daring to start with Edgar Allan Poe, but the fact that they were short stories, kind of encouraged me, and I do not repent that decision at all. I read 4 short stories. One was Lysia, I hope that's how it is pronounced. The second one was The Fall of the House of Usher. The third one is The Pit and the Pendulum, and the fourth was The Telltale Heart. So all the 4 were absolute pleasure to read. I was adequately horrified and I was completely engrossed in the story. I was quite satisfied. Luckily, I didn't have to go out and buy new book for this endeavor. I already had the greatest works of Edgar Allan Poe in my home library, so I picked it up and I selected the 4 aforementioned short stories. Edgar Allan Poe is one of the most prominent American writer of Gothic literature from the 19th century. He is also known to be the inventor of the detective story. His detective, Auguste Dupin, is considered to be the inspiration for the famous Sherlock Holmes. He was prolific in his writing. He has written a lot of poems, mostly Gothic horror poems, and a lot of short stories. Definitely a prominent figure of the Romantic movement in American literature. So that was a brief introduction to Edgar Allan Poe in case you didn't know who he was. So I'll start with the first one which I read, which is Lysia. I hope that's how it's pronounced. It was published in 1838, I think. Let me check. Yes, 1838. This story is told by an unreliable, unnamed narrator, just like most of his short stories. Edgar Allan Poe is very famous for using unreliable narrators to narrate his stories. It is kind of a Gothic style satire. The story is about a man, again unnamed narrator, who is married to this wonderful woman called Lysia. Now he is head over heels about her. She is a raven-haired, beautiful woman. But what mesmerizes uh, the narrator is her intelligence. He claims that he has never ever encountered a woman with her level of intelligence, and that is what mainly attracts him towards her. So he's completely in love with her, but unfortunately, Lysia dies, and he is devastated. Then he marries another lady called Lady Rowena. Now, Lady Rowena is the aesthetic opposite of Lady Lysia. Now, because Lysia was raven-haired and Lady Rowena is blonde. This is very important for the plot ending, but I'm not going to spoil it for you. Unfortunately, misfortune strikes again for the narrator, and his second wife, Lady Rowena, also dies. I do not want to spoil the ending for you because I don't want to spoil the experience while you're reading it for the first time, because you should read it. It's a short story. It will take you not more than half an hour to read the book. Now, in general, what I really liked about Lysia when I started off is his writing style, Edgar Allan Poe's writing style. Now, it is, the old 19th century archaic English writing. It's a little bit different from the English that we read these days. I have to admit that sometimes I had to read some sentences multiple times to understand the meaning, because they are lengthy and dragging sentences. So I had to go back and read the beginning once again. But that's all right. But that added to the beauty of the prose of Poe. Prose of Poe. There is something that happens at the end, which is kind of a very supernatural kind of event. But as readers, we are confused whether it really happened or not, because of the unreliability of the narrator, because the narrator is an opium addict, and there are a lot of references to his addiction, and also subject of preternatural in various stanzas and various places throughout the short story. So you at the end of the story are left with a question mark whether what happened, whether it was his imagination or whether this actually happened. And I really like that uncertainty that is left open for readers' interpretation. Another thing that I liked is the poem that is included in this short story. This poem is basically so beautifully written, and it is something that Lysia, while she is in her delirium, she is about to die, she composed it herself, and he writes it down. The poem basically is about Lady Lysia's fear of mortality. This was the time of romanticism in English literature, and writing a story of fear of death instead of romanticizing the beauty of death, which was very common in that era, is very radical for Poe to do. And I really like that aspect of it. Do read the poem, do not skip it. It's beautifully written. The most important thing for me in this story was the atmosphere. This is going to be a recurring theme in this video, because all the short stories have amazing atmospheric ambience that draws you into the story, and that creates that gothic feeling about the whole story. And that's what sold these stories to me. So that is going to be a recurring theme, the atmosphere, the gothic horror atmosphere that so elegantly, so beautifully, so effortlessly created by Poe. So to sum up, I really liked Lysia. Please do read it. It's just around 30 pages or something, even less in my copy. So yeah, try it out, guys. The second story that I read was The Fall of the House of Usher. This story is also told by an unnamed narrator. Now, this narrator is called by one of his childhood friends to his home. His name is Roderick Usher. And once the narrator reaches there to Usher's home, he finds out that it is a very old, dreary, almost dilapidated mansion. Once he reaches there, he is welcomed by Roderick, who is very pale and weak from illness. He is very ill. The interior of the house is as equally spooky as the outside, and it feels very creepy. Anywho, what happens is they start having a conversation, and at that time, he says that he has a sister, Madeline, and she is also extremely ill, and he is very devastated because they are the only surviving members of the whole Usher family. Days pass. At some point, Roderick informs this narrator that Madeline, his sister, has passed away, and he needs his help in keeping her body in a chamber so that it cannot be used for medical purposes, which he doesn't want to be done to sister's body. So they try to take it to a chamber underneath the house, like into a dungeon kind of a place. So that is done, and the story unfolds from there. It becomes spookier, creepier, and scarier from there. It has all the elements of a quintessential Gothic story. It has the haunted house, people with mental sickness, bodily sickness, barren, dreary, scary landscape, and spooky voices and noises heard in the night, and bad weather. It was a wholesome Gothic horror story. Again, in the story, what I really liked is a poem that is included, which is aptly named The Haunted Palace. After reading two of his stories, I believe that Poe really relies on creating an ambience and atmosphere of horror, and that is one of the main success of his story. And also, he relies on the unreliability of his narrators, where the readers are left with a lot of questions. That also adds to the intrigue of the story. The next two books that I'm going to talk about are a little bit different from the first two, because the first two had clear elements of supernatural in them, but the next two do not have them. The third book that I read was The Telltale Heart. Now, this also is from the eyes of a narrator who is unreliable. Now, unreliable because he is clearly insane. However, the story starts with the narrator explaining or trying to convince whoever is listening that he is completely sane. Why is he forced to justify himself? It's because he has committed a crime. The crime is that he murdered an old man. Now, the story doesn't explains or clarifies who the old man is to the narrator. It could be, I don't know, a father figure, or uh, somebody he's staying with, his landlord, or we don't know, his boss, we don't know. But basically, he killed this old man because of the reason that the old man had vulture like eyes, which really irritated him, which ticked him off every time the man gazed upon him. After committing the crime, he goes about cutting his body parts, in a bathtub, and then disposing it off under the planks, wooden planks of the flooring. That's a story. I'm not telling you the ending, definitely not. The irony about the story is that in his attempt to establish himself as mentally sane, because he doesn't want to be called as a madman, he ends up kind of uh, admitting his crime, so that because the reason that he gives to establish his sanity is the fact that, hey, look at the careful, stealthy way I used to commit the crime. If I was a madman, I wouldn't be so careful, I wouldn't be so stealthy about my action. That would take the mental capacity of a sane person. The number one reason I liked this story is because, again, of the uncertainty that Poe leaves open for narrator's interpretation. Why is a narrator the way he is? Does he have paranoid schizophrenia, or he is hypersensitive? What is his issue? We do not know. Or whether he intentionally killed this person, he was actually sane. We don't know that. It is left open to the narrator to interpret. So I like that open-endedness in the story, that we can have our own interpretation. It was a very brief short story, 4 or 5 pages, but it really, really enthralled me. The fourth and the final short story that I read is The Pit and the Pendulum. Now, it doesn't have a plot as such, it is basically explaining the experience of a narrator who was captured during the Spanish Inquisition and put in the dungeon and being tortured. So, the whole story is the torture that he underwent. Out of the four, I think this is my favorite story, even though the plot is very simple, very straightforward. But the fear the story induces in you, because there is this minute by minute explanation of what the narrator goes inside that pit. And he is tied up in the pit, and there is this huge ass pendulum with a poleaxe attached to its end, and it is swinging, and in every moment it is coming down, and it could slice him into two at any moment. That was really scary. So, definitely, Poe uses the emotion of fear to captivate the reader. Even though there are no supernatural elements, he is completely using realism in the story. There are so many horror elements. For example, the claustrophobia of being imprisoned in a dungeon, in a pit. Actually, there is no light, there is absolute darkness in the beginning. So, the fear of darkness and the thirst and hunger. This narrator is being attacked by swarms of rats, and there is this huge ass pendulum, like I said, which is trying to slice him in half. And Yeah, basically, he is facing his death, but the death is not coming, it is coming to you inch by inch. And that's, I think, the worst way to kill somebody. Not killing him already, but threatening him for days together that he will be killed now any minute. And it is so exciting to see or read how at the last minute he escapes his ordeal, because he mentioned in the story that his judge's teeth were whiter than the paper that he is writing this story on. We understand that he has survived the ordeal. So Poe does a really good job of playing with the emotion of fear of the reader to, just keep him engaged and engrossed in this story. For some reason, it reminded me of Gerald's Game, based on Stephen King's novel. Somehow, it gave me that feeling of being trapped in an enclosed space and having to face somebody's worst nightmares and fear, and yeah, being trapped in a place like that. So I think because of that claustrophobic feeling, it gave me the feeling of Gerald's Game. Uh, so those were the four short stories by Edgar Allan Poe that I read. Having stepped into the horror genre with such a positive note, I will definitely read more horror. Not all of us have the time and patience to sit and read a full-fledged 500-page novel, even if we love the genre. That's why a lot of people turn to TV shows. So I think short stories really will help with that. And if you are a lover of horror genre, please do check out Edgar Allan Poe's works. From the four short stories that I have read, I can totally recommend this master of Gothic literature to anybody who loves horror. So that's it, guys. That was my first impression on Edgar Allan Poe. I will be back soon with another amazing bookish content. Until then, this is Angela signing off. Please do not forget to subscribe. Bye bye.